I knew you'd make the right decision. Someday, all of Mobius will thank you. Well, almost all.
Sleet and Dingo are the henchmen of the season, and they basically encapsulate the basic brains and brawn duology that one would expect from two different characters like this working under the big bad. Sleet is very cowardly, but he's also undoubtedly smarter than Dingo is, and Dingo just basically exists to be dumb muscle. Their antics usually are used for comic relief, but their effectiveness changes from episode to episode depending on the writer. Gee, what a shock. Unfortunately, they are probably the best part of the series because at least their antics got a little bit of a chuckle out of me, though they aren't nearly as funny or endearing as Scratch and Grounder were back in the adventure days. Their main shtick is the fact that Sleet can use some sort of molecular rearranger to transform Dingo into any item that he needs at the time, but of course the two of them are never smart to use it in a very effective way, and its own power seems to fluctuate from episode to episode, much like everything else. I'm depressed. Let's move on to animation. The animation in this series is really weird, using very fast background swipes and odd animation loops for characters when they're standing still. There's also a really weird animation glitch that I've seen where in the first few episodes, no matter what they're discussing, all the characters are constantly smiling, no matter what. The character animation does look nice and smooth, but for some reason they can't seem to stay on model very often. It's like their bodies are made out of some sort of weird jelly structure, where they'll constantly shapeshift. Sometimes they'll seem a little bit wider, sometimes a little bit thinner. It's just very inconsistent for most of the characters.
Just like the bird, yes.
I will say for what it's worth that the background animation actually looks really, really nice, with many details in the different environments that the characters visit, and the character designs themselves are actually really nice looking, at least when they're standing still. But other than that, I really have nothing more to say about the animation. It just seems kind of off to me when compared to the other two. When it comes to sound design, I also don't have a lot to say. All of the sounds in this are just very average. Sound effects feel very, very stock, and background music is hardly noticeable most of the time, usually only consisting of single chords on a rock guitar or one strange squeaking riff that they'll play every now and then. But other than that, you really won't notice it that much, and it might as well not be there at all. Voice acting is similarly limited, with the only notable thing about it being that Jaleel White plays all three of the main characters, Sonic, Sonia, and Manic. But I think it's pretty safe to say that he wasn't all that invested in the series. And come to think of it, I don't think any of the voice actors were really giving it their all. And then we have the songs. Dear God, the songs. As I mentioned earlier in this review, every single episode of this series, no matter how jarring or how inappropriate it was to place it in, had its very own song placed within the episode. Completely original, never once repeating. About 1.5 to 2 minutes long, they would just shove a song into the episode. And it was accompanied by a music video, which was basically just a bunch of clips of the episode you're already watching, accompanied with some really annoying video filters and video effects thrown on top. They are completely superfluous, and at best, they can be kind of earwormy and harmless and then just go away, and at worst, they can completely kill any enthusiasm you might have had for whatever you were watching. And I remind you, this series already had some pretty big pacing issues to begin with in its episodes. I know 1.5 minutes might not seem like a long time to some of you, but in terms of a 22-minute cartoon, that is a lot of wasted time that could have potentially been put to better use structuring the plot or developing the characters or doing something, anything other than just giving us a completely out of nowhere song that nobody asked for. And you want to know what the worst part about it is? Since these songs were apparently such a big selling point, every single DVD set that you buy of Sonic Underground comes with a bonus CD of songs from the show. I have never once removed these CDs from the packaging, because I never want to hear the songs again. It is nice that they at least tried to give us a little bit of variety with these songs. A majority of them are in completely different genres from episode to episode. They have songs in rap, rock, Rastafarian, hip-hop, and even a country song in one episode. However, that doesn't change the fact that the lyrics are very idiotic and the beats oftentimes very generic. It also doesn't help that a majority of the singers are not Jaleel White. In fact, scratch that, none of them are, which is a very big disconnect already, since they sound absolutely nothing like when the characters are talking, and it also doesn't help that the singers don't sound very good in certain genres. They just don't mesh with what they're singing. But on top of all of that, there is one very big problem that pisses me off beyond everything else in this series. You want to know what that problem is? They didn't even have the decency to give us an ending. Yes, you heard that right. The finale that they are supposedly building to, the thing that they mention at the beginning of every single theme song, the whole reason that they are looking for their mother, it never happens in the show itself. Like I said at the beginning of this review, the plot really just meanders around, and whatever progress is made during an episode towards getting to that resolution, it's usually set back to 0 by the time the episode ends. Or even worse, even if they have made progress and it's not been immediately reversed, they usually just completely forget about it during the next episode. Which again is a really big problem when you set up an epic storyline and yet you treat it like an episodic series. The last episode of the series resolves absolutely nothing about the overarching plot and is basically just a very generic feeling virtual reality battle against Robotnik, and there really isn't much more to it than that. I probably would cut this series a little bit more slack if they actually had bothered to give us a resolution to the plot. And heck, I probably would have suggested that they saved their 3-parter, the Chaos Emerald trilogy, to end the series on if they weren't going to give the overarching plot some resolution. Mostly because not only does it have the strongest writing in the series, helped by the fact that Ben Hurst and Pat Lee, who worked on the Saturday morning cartoon, wrote this trilogy, but it would also help end on a strong note. I mean, sure, it's still plagued by a lot of the other problems in that its ending comes right out of nowhere and just sort of peters out, and it also has a song in every episode of the trilogy, much like the rest of the series, but it does have some strong writing, some good interaction, and some honest-to-God character development for Knuckles of all characters, who was only featured in a single episode of the series before this, and is not seen in a single episode afterwards. And unlike the other characters, I'd like to think that his character development actually stuck, since, once again, we don't see him at all after this episode aired. After all these years, oddly enough, it does seem that we are going to get an ending, however. Head writer Ian Flynn, who works for Archie Comics on the Mega Man comic, The New Guardians, and both of their Sonic the Hedgehog books, has stated that he wants to write an ending for the television show and place it in the pages of Sonic Universe. I don't really know how he's going to wrap up an entire television show in a single issue, especially when, as I've established, they didn't really get very close to the end of the series to begin with. Now, initially, Flynn had wanted this to be the story that would be in the 50th issue of Sonic Universe, but for one reason or another that didn't happen, and it was put on indefinite hiatus in favor of printing an issue all about Metal Sonic, which, by the way, was flippin' awesome. However, Flynn has assured the fans that the ending to Sonic Underground is coming, It just hasn't been stated when. And that's a good segue for going into my final thoughts on the episode, because when I use the word fan, I use it very loosely, because while I don't find this show to be very good, it utterly fascinates me. The show itself is garbage through and through. I personally believe that, and what little good there is in it really doesn't make up for all the bad. However, I will say that I am very fascinated by the way that people react to this show. For starters, I'm kind of convinced that this originally was not supposed to be a Sonic the Hedgehog project. It just feels so different from everything that's come before, and indeed anything that's come since. And it really seems like it was originally pitched as its own cartoon, but for whatever reason they slapped Sonic on it to try and give it some brand recognition. I'm not saying that it being its own original cartoon would have helped it be any better than it is, but still, it's an interesting thing to consider. That's one of the few positives I can say about this series too, is that the world that they created is very large, very alien, and looks like something I would want to explore. They just don't give a whole lot of time to it. And even when they introduce assets that could be interesting, they never follow up on it. They introduce it, they use it for the plot, and then it's completely forgotten about, much like everything else in this series. It also somehow managed to last 40 episodes, despite the fact that I knew absolutely no one who was aware of its existence on television until like 5 or 6 years after it was taken off air. Yeah, this series got 40 episodes of plotless meandering, whereas a great series like the Saturday morning cartoon only got 26 episodes and was cut off before it could continue what was a great story. There is no justice in the world, folks. Oddly enough, the series also seems to be gaining popularity again, at least from what corporate sponsors seem to think. It's not only available in DVD format, and has been for quite a while now, but they just recently released the entire series back on iTunes for about $30 a season, and add to it, you can also find the entire series rerunning as we speak on Disney XD. I have no idea why, but I'm not going to question it because I don't exactly watch a lot of TV nowadays. Anyway, that basically sums this up. As you can see, this was quite a big drop in quality from what was originally turning out to be a pretty good run of cartoons, even if I did only enjoy a few of them kind of ironically. This was the first one that I really can't recommend very seriously, but next we'll be getting into the final part of this Sonic the Hedgehog retrospective when we take a look at what I personally believe to be the worst of the 5. So join me next time as we take a look at Sonic X. I'll see you all next time.